Emily always tried to believe her parents loved her, even when their words cut deep. As a kid, she'd come home excited about something she drew or a part she got in a school play, and her mom would brush it off like it didn't matter. Denise would tell her she was being too emotional or too dramatic, and her dad, Robert, usually just laughed or changed the subject. If Claire did the same thing, they'd call her talented or smart. Emily learned early that nothing she did was ever good enough. By the time she was a teenager, she stopped sharing things with them. If she mentioned wanting to study art or music, Denise would call it a waste of time and say she'd end up broke. Robert liked to joke that Emily wasn't built for success like Claire. They thought it was funny. She'd just sit there and pretend it didn't hurt. Claire, their pride and joy, could do anything and still be praised. If Emily ever stood up for herself, Denise accused her of being jealous, and Robert dismissed her completely. It wasn't a loud kind of cruelty. It was quiet, everyday disrespect that wore her down. She didn't know how heavy it was until she met Adam. Adam didn't treat her like she was less than anyone else. He listened when she spoke, encouraged her to try new things, and never made jokes at her expense. When she introduced him to her parents, she hoped things would be different. Instead, they treated him like he was beneath their standards. Denise asked questions that sounded polite, but were meant to judge him. Robert acted like Adam was temporary and unimportant. Even then, Emily tried to keep peace. She thought maybe if she just stayed quiet, things would settle. But every visit turned into another round of subtle insults and dismissive comments. When she and Adam got married, her parents showed up, but only for appearances. They stayed long enough to comment on the decorations and remind her she was lucky someone picked her. Adam saw everything. He never pushed her to cut them off, but he never pretended their treatment was normal. He told her she deserved respect, even from family. Especially from family. She wanted to believe that, but years of being talked down to made it hard. As time went on, their behavior didn't change. Holidays, birthdays, quick visits. They always found a way to remind Emily she didn't measure up. If Adam shared an idea or talked about his work, they acted uninterested. Claire could mention something basic, and they would light up like she solved world peace. Emily stayed quiet, but the silence started feeling heavier. Adam would hold her hand when they left and tell her she didn't have to keep going back to people who made her feel small. She wanted to defend her parents, but deep down she knew Adam was right. She kept hoping for a day when they would see her differently or apologize for the way they treated her. That day never came. Instead, the gap between them kept growing, and the pain turned into something she couldn't hide as easily. She didn't know it yet, but everything. Emily and Adam had been trying to have a baby for a long time. They went through tests, doctor visits, and months of disappointment. Every time a result came back negative, she blamed herself, even when Adam reminded her it wasn't her fault. They kept it private because she didn't want her parents to use it against her the way they used everything else. When she finally got pregnant, it didn't feel real at first. The doctor confirmed it, and she cried in the car before she could even drive home. Adam held her and said it was their moment, their blessing, and no one could take it away. For weeks, they kept the news between them, just enjoying the quiet feeling of finally getting something they had prayed for. Then came the dinner invite from her parents. Denise said she wanted a proper family evening, and Emily thought maybe, just maybe, this was the right time to share the news. Adam asked her gently if she was sure, and she said yes. She wanted to believe they would be happy for her, even if they didn't show it perfectly. They arrived at her parents' house on a Saturday evening. Claire was already there, sitting like she owned the place. Dinner started with the usual small talk, Claire taking over most of the conversation while Denise and Robert nodded along. They barely asked Emily or Adam anything. Halfway through the meal, Emily took a quiet breath and said she had something to share. She tried to smile and told them she was pregnant. For a second, there was silence. She thought maybe they were surprised or processing it. Then Denise leaned back and said, "Well, let's hope the baby doesn't inherit your weakness." She laughed like it was clever. Robert shook his head and added, "Looks like that charity case finally knocked her up." He said it like Adam wasn't sitting right there. Claire just smirked and said, "Wow, didn't think it would actually happen." No one said congratulations. No one asked how she was feeling or how far along she was. They didn't care. They treated the biggest news of her life like a joke. Emily felt her chest tighten, but she didn't cry. She just stared at her plate and tried to breathe. Adam didn't say a word, but she could feel his hand tense under the table. Denise kept talking like nothing was wrong, making comments about not expecting much, and how some people get lucky by accident. Robert went on about how Adam should be grateful he married into a real family. Claire just enjoyed the show. Emily didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just sat there quietly while they dismissed something that meant everything to her. Adam squeezed her hand once, like he was holding back everything he wanted to say. When the meal ended, no one walked them to the door. No hugs, no support, not even fake interest. As they stepped outside, the night air felt different. Emily didn't speak on the ride home. Adam didn't push her to. The damage was done in a few minutes, and she couldn't pretend it was normal anymore. Was slowly building toward the moment that would change everything. Emily sat there trying to believe she heard them wrong. Maybe it was stress. Maybe she was being too sensitive. She tried to remind herself to stay calm and not react, the same way she had done her whole life around them. She kept her eyes on her plate and blinked a few times to stop the tears from coming. Adam stayed quiet, but she could feel his eyes on her. He wasn't angry at her, he was angry for her. He had never heard them talk about her like that so openly before. It was the kind of cruelty that didn't even try to hide itself. Just when Emily thought the moment might pass and everyone would move on, Denise spoke again. She didn't lower her voice or soften her tone. She looked straight at Emily and said, "You should just be grateful anyone even wants to build a family with." She said it like she was giving advice. The words hit harder than the earlier comments. Before Emily could react, Robert laughed and shook his head like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Claire leaned back, smirking, and added a quiet, "Honestly." Then the table laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not confusion. Real laughter. The kind people use when they think something is deserved. Emily didn't even look up. She just stared at her hands and tried to breathe around the knot in her throat. Adam watched each of their faces. He didn't understand how they could talk to her like that, how they could tear her down in the middle of what should have been a happy moment. He had always known they were dismissive and cold, but this was different. This was open humiliation. He looked at Emily, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. He could tell she was trying to stay composed, to avoid making it worse. That's what she had learned to do around them. Stay small, stay quiet, swallow the hurt. Denise kept eating like nothing had happened. Robert took a sip of his drink and made a joke about how Emily always takes things too seriously. Claire started scrolling her phone, bored with the moment now that she'd gotten what she wanted. The room felt heavier than before. Emily didn't speak, and no one asked her anything else. She answered only if someone directly looked at her, and even then her replies were short and quiet. Adam tried to comfort her with a gentle touch under the table, but she barely moved. They stayed only because walking out in that moment felt too loud, too final. Emily wasn't ready to make a scene. She still hoped maybe someone would realize they'd gone too far and apologize, but no one did. The rest of the dinner went on with casual conversation. Claire talking about herself, Denise correcting her, Robert pretending to agree with both. Emily kept her head down until it was time to leave. Adam didn't argue with her choice to stay silent, but something in him changed. He had seen enough to know this was not a family that made mistakes. They made. Emily couldn't sit there any longer. She stood up slowly and said she needed to use the bathroom. No one at the table asked if she was okay. They barely looked at her. She walked down the hallway with her eyes on the floor, trying not to let the tears fall until she was out of sight. As soon as she closed the bathroom door, the first tear slipped out. Then another. She didn't make a sound. She had spent years teaching herself how to cry quietly. She covered her mouth with her hand and stood by the sink, trying to breathe through the ache in her chest. A few moments passed before there was a soft knock. Adam didn't push the door open or call her name. He just waited. She unlocked the door and stepped back, letting him in. The moment he saw her face, his expression changed from controlled anger to heartbreak. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't tell her to calm down. He just pulled her into his arms and held her. She buried her face in his shirt and let the tears fall. He wrapped his arms around her and stayed quiet until her breathing slowed. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and tired. She said she didn't want to make things worse. She said maybe she was overreacting. She said she just wanted to get through the night. Adam pulled back enough to look at her. His voice was low but steady. He told her she wasn't overreacting. He said no one deserves to be treated the way they treated her, especially not by their own family. He told her she had spent her whole life excusing their behavior, and they had crossed a line he would never ignore again. Emily tried to explain that walking out would start a fight she wasn't prepared to handle. Adam shook his head and said there was no fight worth staying for when the cost was her dignity. Then he said the words she didn't expect but needed. "We're leaving tonight. You don't ever have to come back here." She looked up at him, unsure if she believed he meant it. He did. There was no anger in his tone, just clarity. He wasn't asking for permission. He was telling her she had a choice she'd never been allowed to see before. She wiped her cheeks and nodded slowly. She wasn't ready to speak, but she didn't disagree. Adam kissed her forehead and asked if she needed another minute. She said no. She didn't want to stay in that bathroom any longer than she had to. They stepped out together. Emily kept her eyes down, and Adam stayed close at her side as they walked back toward the dining room. He was calm, but there was a firmness in his walk that hadn't been there before. The laughter from the table was still going, like nothing had happened. None of them knew that everything had just shifted. Emily didn't realize yet that this moment was the beginning of the end of pretending. Choices. And they chose to hurt her without thinking twice. Emily and Adam stepped back into the dining room. Her parents were still laughing at something Claire had said, as if nothing meaningful had taken place at that table. No one looked up to check on her or ask if she was okay. It was like she had only stepped away to get water, not to cry alone in a bathroom. Adam didn't sit back down. He stood at the end of the table and looked at each of them. His voice was calm, steady, and controlled when he said, "We're done here." The room finally went quiet for a second. Emily stood beside him, her hand in his. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Denise leaned back in her chair with a smirk. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, waving her hand like he was a child having a tantrum. "You two are always so sensitive." Robert didn't take it seriously either. He gave a short laugh and muttered something under his breath about overreacting. Claire just rolled her eyes and said, "You can't even finish dinner?" Adam didn't argue with any of them. He didn't raise his voice or explain himself. He simply took Emily's hand and guided her toward the front door. She didn't look at anyone on her way out. She focused on walking straight, keeping her breathing steady. Behind them, Denise let out a fake laugh and said loudly, "Unbelievable." Claire followed with a sarcastic, "Okay, bye then." Robert didn't say anything else, but he didn't stop them either. No one stood up. No one asked them to stay. No one apologized or even pretended to care. The chairs didn't move, the plates stayed on the table, and the laughter started up again before Emily and Adam even reached the hallway. When they stepped outside, the air felt different, cooler, quieter, safer. Adam didn't look back, and Emily didn't ask him to. They walked to the car without speaking. She could still hear faint laughter from inside the house when the door closed behind them. Adam opened the passenger door for her. As she sat down, she felt the weight of everything that had happened settle in her chest. It wasn't just the comments. It was the way they didn't even try to pretend she mattered. When Adam got into the driver's seat and shut his door, the car went silent. He didn't start the engine right away. He looked straight ahead for a moment, then glanced at her. She didn't cry this time. She just stared out the window, numb and quiet. He reached for her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. There were no dramatic speeches or long explanations. The decision had already been made the moment he said those 3 words at the table. "We're done here." As they pulled away from the house, no one called after them. No messages came through. No footsteps followed. Only the sound of the car. That night, when they got home, Emily went straight to their bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't cry or talk. She just sat there in silence, trying to make sense of everything. Adam didn't push her to speak. He sat beside her and waited until she was ready. After a long pause, she said quietly that she was done. Not just for the night, completely. She said she didn't want to call them, visit them, or pretend things were fine anymore. The words came out softly, but they were firm. She sounded tired, not angry. Adam told her he supported her fully. He reminded her that choosing peace was not being selfish. It was survival. For the first time, she said out loud that her parents had never treated her like a daughter, only like someone they could control and laugh at. Before going to bed, she silenced her phone. Calls started coming in, first from her mother, then from Claire. No one apologized in their messages. They just asked where she went and made comments like she owed them an explanation. Emily didn't respond. She turned her phone off completely. The next morning, she blocked their numbers. She also blocked the landline at their house to stop surprise calls. She asked Adam to change the settings on the doorbell camera so her parents couldn't show up and wait outside without her knowing. He handled it without question. For the first few days, she felt strange, not free, not strong, just empty. She had spent her whole life trying to earn approval from people who never intended to give it. Now that she wasn't trying anymore, she didn't know what to do with the space it left inside her. Adam suggested therapy. She hesitated at first, saying she didn't want to make it a big deal. But he reminded her that her feelings were not a burden, and that healing was something she deserved. He didn't push. He simply stayed beside her until she agreed to try. She started going once a week. In those sessions, she began to see how deeply her parents' words and actions had shaped her. She realized she had spent years believing she was lucky anyone loved her. She had accepted disrespect because she thought that was normal. At home, Adam became her safe place. When she woke up from nightmares, he sat with her until she fell back asleep. When she had moments of guilt or doubt, he reminded her she didn't walk away from a family, she walked away from abuse. He didn't let her minimize what she went through. Slowly, she noticed the difference in her own reactions. She didn't flinch when someone raised their voice. She didn't apologize every time she took up space. She began to speak without waiting for permission. Her parents tried to reach her through different numbers and email. Claire sent messages pretending to care, but Emily didn't reply. Denise left voicemails, making herself the victim. Robert tried to get updates through distant relatives. Emily ignored all of it. She didn't make a dramatic announcement or write a long explanation. She just stopped allowing them access to her life. For the first time, the quiet around her wasn't painful, it was peaceful. And with Adam standing by her side, she started rebuilding the parts of herself they had spent years tearing down. Engine and the quiet understanding that they were not going back. Months passed, and Emily focused on her pregnancy and her healing. Therapy helped her understand how long she had carried other people's disrespect as her responsibility. Adam never let her feel alone through any of it. He went with her to appointments, helped set up the nursery, and made sure she rested when she tried to do too much. When the baby finally arrived, it was a quiet and emotional moment. Emily held her daughter and whispered her name, Lily. Adam couldn't stop smiling. He took pictures, texted the people they trusted, and stayed close to Emily as she recovered. There was no stress, no drama, just peace in that hospital room. But word travels, especially in families that think rules don't apply to them. 2 days after Lily was born, Denise and Robert showed up at the hospital without calling. They walked in like they were expected, like nothing had ever happened between them. They didn't bring flowers or gifts. They didn't ask permission. They just assumed their presence would be accepted. They walked up to the front desk with confident smiles and told the receptionist they were there to see their daughter and new grandchild. Denise acted like she owned the building. Robert looked annoyed that he even had to check in. Inside the room, Emily was resting while Adam held Lily. A nurse quietly came in and told Adam that 2 people claiming to be her parents were in the lobby asking to be let in. Emily froze for a second. Her breathing changed, and she looked toward the door like she expected them to walk in any minute. She didn't say a word, but the look in her eyes said everything. Adam stood up right away and told the nurse calmly, "They're not allowed in. Please don't let them near her." He didn't raise his voice, didn't explain their history, and didn't ask if it was okay. He said it like a decision, not a request. The nurse nodded without hesitation. She could see the tension in Emily's face and understood enough to act. She went back to the front desk and informed the staff that no visitors were allowed for that patient except the approved list. Out in the lobby, Denise tried to act offended. She said there must be a mistake and insisted that her daughter would never keep them out. Robert rolled his eyes and muttered something about Adam controlling everything. They waited, expecting someone to escort them in. When the nurse returned and told them firmly that the parents did not want visitors, Denise looked stunned, not hurt, insulted. She wasn't used to being denied. She turned to Robert and said, "She must be emotional. We'll just go in for a minute." The nurse didn't move. She repeated that they would not be allowed in, and that forcing entry would result in security being called. That was the first time they stopped smiling. Inside the room, Emily stayed quiet, watching Lily sleep against Adam's shoulder. She didn't ask what they said or if they were still there. She didn't need details. All she needed to know was that the door was staying closed. For the first time in her life, her parents showed up where she was, and this time they stayed on the other side of the wall. When the nurse refused to let them in, Denise and Robert stepped outside the hospital lobby and called Emily right away. Emily's phone was on silent, but Adam saw the screen light up with her mother's name. He looked at her and asked if she wanted him to ignore it. She took a breath and said she'd handle it. She answered the call quietly. Before she could say anything, Denise's voice came through sharp and annoyed. She didn't ask how Emily was or if the baby was healthy. She didn't ask if Emily was resting or needed anything. She went straight to anger. Denise said she couldn't believe her own daughter was locking out her parents after everything they'd done for her. She called Emily ungrateful and dramatic and said people would judge her for keeping family away from their grandchild. Robert could be heard in the background saying that Adam was probably behind it. Emily listened without interrupting. Her hand tightened around the phone, but her voice stayed steady. She said the nurse was following her wishes and that she didn't want them. Denise scoffed and said, "You don't get to make that decision. You're still our daughter whether you like it or not." Then Denise went further. She said if Emily didn't come to her senses, she and Robert would cut her out of the will. She said Emily was making a mistake for choosing a husband over her blood. She talked like she was punishing a child, not speaking to a grown woman who had just given birth. Something in Emily finally broke loose, not in tears but in clarity. She didn't yell. She didn't crumble. She spoke in a calm voice that surprised even her. She said, "You were never there for me. Not when I was a child, not when I needed support, and not when I told you I was pregnant. You laughed at me. You mocked my husband. You made it clear I didn't matter." Denise tried to talk over her, but Emily didn't stop. She said, "You don't get access to my child just because you share my last name. You don't get respect you never gave. You don't get to hurt me and walk into my life whenever you want." Robert shouted in the background for her to watch her tone, but she ignored him. She said, "I don't owe you a place in my home. I don't owe you forgiveness. And I don't owe you a seat at my table. Not now. Not ever." Denise went silent for a moment, shocked that Emily didn't back down. Then she muttered something about Emily being brainwashed and ungrateful, and the call ended with a sharp click. Emily set the phone down and didn't cry. She just exhaled slowly, like something heavy had finally been lifted off her chest. Adam stood nearby with Lily in his arms, watching her with quiet pride. She blocked both numbers after that. No hesitation this time. There were no second thoughts, no guilt, no urge to fix it. She didn't look back at the door or wonder if they were still outside the hospital. For the first time, she didn't feel like a scared daughter. She felt like a mother protecting her own child, and she meant every word she said. Emily thought maybe Claire wanted peace, but the truth came out quickly. Claire called with a soft voice, saying she just wanted the family to be whole again, and that everyone should move past old arguments. She acted concerned and reasonable, pretending she understood both sides and wanted to help fix things. At first, Emily stayed quiet and listened. She didn't want to assume the worst, even though a part of her stayed guarded. Claire kept talking about how parents and children shouldn't stay angry forever, and how Lily deserved grandparents. She spoke as if Denise and Robert had only made small mistakes that should be forgiven easily. But a few days later, Emily found out why Claire was suddenly interested. A mutual friend slipped up and mentioned that Claire's business had failed, and she had been trying to reach people for money and favors. She was drowning in credit card debt, and whispers had spread about her asking relatives for temporary help. It clicked for Emily like a switch being flipped. Claire didn't want peace, she wanted access. She knew Adam was successful and well-connected, and she assumed Emily would open the door again if she played the role of peacemaker. Everything she said about family suddenly sounded fake and calculated. Emily didn't let it drag on. The next time Claire called, Emily didn't pretend to be confused. She told her she knew the real reason behind her sudden concern, and that she wouldn't let anyone use her husband, or her daughter for convenience. Claire tried to deny it at first, then got defensive, saying things like, "You're being unfair, and you don't understand how hard things have been for me." Emily didn't argue. She stayed calm but firm. She told Claire that she grew up being manipulated and talked over, and she was done letting anyone treat her like an easy option. She said she didn't need people who only showed up when they wanted something. When Claire realized she couldn't guilt or pressure her, she changed tone and tried to sound hurt. She said Emily was ruining the family, and that she was choosing a man over blood. Emily didn't let those words sink in this time. She simply said, "My family is the one I chose and the one that respects me. You don't get to come back because it benefits you." After that call, Emily blocked her number and email. She removed her from every platform and told the hospital and daycare that no one except approved names was allowed access. She didn't wait for another excuse or apology that meant nothing. Adam fully supported her. He didn't question her decision or ask her to be softer. He was proud of her for seeing through the act quickly and protecting herself and their daughter. With Claire gone for good, there was finally no more noise or guilt pressing in from the outside. Emily didn't feel sad or worried afterward. She felt lighter, for the first time in. Years passed, and life changed in ways Denise and Robert never expected. Their health started to decline, and the people they once relied on slowly backed away. Friends stopped checking in, relatives kept their distance, and Claire moved out of state to chase a fresh start of her own. The cruel confidence they once had faded when there was no one left to impress or control. With their world shrinking and their strength fading, they finally tried to reach out to Emily. They called from different numbers, sent messages through distant relatives, and even mailed letters hoping she would feel guilty or nostalgic. But Emily never answered. She didn't send hate, anger, or long explanations. She simply gave them silence, the same silence they gave her heart when she needed love. While they were sitting alone in their regrets, Emily was living the life she built with care. She and Adam raised Lily in a home full of calm, respect, and warmth. There was laughter at their table, the kind that didn't come from cruelty or mockery. Emily never spoke badly about her parents around her daughter. She just showed Lily what real love looked like. Adam stood by her side every step of the way. Together, they created traditions, celebrated milestones, and made room only for people who added to their happiness. Emily healed slowly, not by forgetting the pain, but by choosing not to live in it anymore. Therapy helped her break the beliefs her parents forced into her. She learned she didn't have to earn love by suffering. She didn't have to prove her worth to people who never valued her. Lily grew up seeing a strong mother who survived without bitterness. She never asked about her grandparents because she never felt their absence. Her life was already full, with parents who adored her and a home where she felt safe. Meanwhile, Denise and Robert started to understand the cost of their choices. They had assumed Emily would always be there, no matter how they treated her. They used to laugh at her pain, confident she wouldn't walk away. But as their world got quieter, they were left with the truth. They hadn't just lost access to their daughter. They lost their place in her story. People around them whispered about their situation, saying it was sad how they ended up alone. But the ones who knew the past weren't surprised. They remembered the way Denise and Robert talked down to others and dismissed their own child like she was a burden. Now, the same arrogance that once made them feel powerful had left them isolated. Emily didn't celebrate their decline. She didn't wish them harm or check in to see how they were doing. She simply lived her life and kept the door closed. Healing became its own kind of justice. Not loud, not revengeful, just final. The ultimate revenge wasn't anger. It was peace. It was choosing her husband, her child, and herself over the people who broke her down. Denise and Robert had laughed at her tears once. In the end, that laughter cost them their daughter, and any legacy they thought they would leave behind. Her life, she had chosen herself without asking for permission.